Hello again. In this lesson, our objective is to demonstrate the various ASP.NET Server controls that can be added to our web applications. We'll also talk about positioning controls using absolute positioning and tools that help us align, size, and space apart the controls. But as we begin, I want to give a brief overview of the Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition windows that are available. Now, as I stated in the previous video, this series of lessons is intended for those who already know some C# syntax as well as HTML. So if you know C#, I'm going to assume that you're somewhat familiar with the various windows that are available in the Visual Studio IDE. All of the Express Edition tools use the same interactive development environment interface with similar windows, toolbars, and menus. However, I realize that some who are watching this might need a quick refresher, so I want to spend just a moment overviewing a few of the basics. Now please note that portions of this video were originally recorded using the Visual Basic programming language options. However, due to the nature of the topic matter, this shouldn't really interfere in any way with your understanding of the material. In other words, although you see references to Visual Basic at times throughout this video, there's nothing specific to Visual Basic or C#, so please don't be alarmed. For this particular lesson, the functionality that I'm going to demonstrate is exactly the same for both C# and Visual Basic. So let's start by creating a little sample application as a springboard for our discussions. We're going to go to File, New Website, like we did in the previous video. Make sure ASP.NET Website is selected. We're going to go to the very end and remove the default name. We're going to type in Lesson 02 and make sure the language is Visual Basic and then click OK. And so now we have our default.aspx in our Lesson 02 project. So as you saw from the previous lesson, where we did the majority of our work was in this main area in the center of the screen. And the main area is home to a number of different tabs. So every time we open up a different file, we get a new tab that we can change so that we can have multiple tabs open and switch easily between one file and the other. Also, individual files, depending on the type of file that they are, have different ways of viewing that file. In the case of the default.aspx, notice at the very bottom of the tab we had the design view versus the source view. That allowed us two different ways to look at the exact same file. The actual source code versus a visual designer that allowed us to kind of see what you see is what you get while we're building our visual interface. Now the tabs can be arranged for your convenience by just holding down on the name of a tab and dragging it to the left or the right. You can see here I put default.aspx at the end of the list of tabs. Or I could drag it and put it at the beginning of the list of tabs. Also, in some cases, I may want to see two tabs at the exact same time, in which case I can right-click on a tab and select New Horizontal Tab Group, which creates two groups of tabs in the main area. This upper set of tabs here and then the lower set of tabs. You can see I only have one here at the bottom. I can get that tab back by selecting Move to the previous tab group. In addition to working with the tabs in the main area, there's also a series of windows that are docked either to the left or the right-hand sides, as we saw in the previous lesson. And before we talk about the functionality of these specific windows, let's talk about windows in general within the Visual Studio IDE. First of all, as you'll notice, I currently have one of the windows in auto hide mode. So when I hover my mouse cursor over the Toolbox tab on the left-hand side, notice that it jettisons out. And when I remove my mouse cursor, it then disappears again off to the left-hand side. However, by selecting the little pin and pushing it down, so now that it's in the down position, notice that the auto hide feature is turned off. Also notice that I can resize the window by using the little crosshairs icon that appears whenever I hover my mouse cursor over just the right position for the side of the window. Also, whenever the auto hide is turned off, I can rip the given window from its current position, and I can just leave it floating in my development environment if I choose, or I can dock it to a different side of the designer interface. Notice that I get these little helper windows that appear, these little helper icons, so that it helps me decide exactly where this will be positioned if I were to drop it at this time. You can see at this point, hovering here, it will become a tab group with the properties window, or I can drag it up here and it'll become part of the tab group of the Solution Explorer. Or I can make it its own tab group to the right of the Solution Explorer, to the left of the Solution Explorer, or underneath or between the Solution Explorer and the Properties window. So I'm going to just drop it here, and you can see now it shares a tabbed area with the Properties window. Or I can then again drag the taskbar off and drop it back into place here on the left-hand side. Select Auto Hide, and once again it disappears. Now in that case, I accidentally dragged the Properties window off, so let's put this back into place here by creating a new tab group. And so let's see if I can rip these two apart. There we go. Now I got it. Great. So we have the Properties window back in its position and the toolbox back here. Turn on Auto Hide, and we're back to where we were when we started. So whenever we have only 3 or 4 windows open, this is not a huge issue. But as you'll discover, if we begin to build our applications, there will be more and more windows involved, and we'll need to find good places for them that are comfortable for us as we develop our web applications. Okay, now let's take a moment to talk about the windows themselves. I'm going to dock or turn off the auto hide and open up the default.aspx page in the main area. Notice when I do that, the toolbox becomes populated with the controls, and we've already used 2 of the controls in the previous video, the label and the text and the button control. Notice that the toolbox is split up into a number of different sections that are only visible whenever we use the little scroll bar on the right hand side. I can use the minus button next to the word standard in order to roll up that category of toolbox items so I can see all the categories. There's data controls, validation controls, which we'll use in this lesson, navigation controls, login controls, which we'll use in several lessons, I believe lesson 9 or 10, web parts, HTML controls, which are traditional HTML controls, not the ASP.NET server control variants, and then a general tab where we can drag and place our favorite controls for quick access. I'm going to expand the standard control area again so I can see all my controls once more. The other window that we used quite a bit was the Solution Explorer. And the Solution Explorer allows us to view all the files that are associated with a given solution, or in the case of a solution list project, as we have here, just a website, a loose collection of individual files. You can see all the files that are associated with a given website. We can also see relationships between files by using the little plus and minus buttons that appear in order to view all the files that are associated, in this case, with the default.aspx file. This is a perfect spot for the code behind file for the default.aspx file, the .vb file, which contains the code behind for that page, as we noted in the previous lesson. And then finally the properties window, which allows us to see all of the properties that we can change for the currently selected item. And we can change the currently selected item by either selecting it from the drop-down box in the properties window, or by selecting the item in the Visual Designer and then making the appropriate changes. In this case, I can change the text of our button that we've added to OK by simply placing my mouse cursor into the settings side next to the label side. Notice that also whenever I select a property, that you can see a description of the use of that property underneath the property window. And to view any events that are supported by that button, I can just click this little toggle, the Events toggle button, which will allow me to see and then also create an event handler for a given event that's supported by that button. Let's go back to the properties window because we won't talk about events and writing code to handle properties and events until the next lesson in this series.